Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon. Yay! Some things before we get started here. I want to let you know where the bathrooms are. You head out the doors you came in on the right. You'll find the restrooms, where you'll also find a summer game code. Summer game,
But Jacob, will you say it out loud for the people who might be watching on the screen? Because they totally deserve their points.
Remind me what it is. The code is great skates. Great skates, one word. I don't even think I'm looking to the right camera. I'm just looking at something. After the conversation we have here, there will be a Q&A, so get your minds cranking, get some good questions in there. I'll be walking around with the mic for a Q&A. So without further ado, we are joined by Caroline Huntoon. They are an educator. They are a writer of middle grade novels and young adult fiction. Let's welcome them to the library.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, it's so nice for you to step away from your summer activities to hang out with us for a little bit and talk about my book, Skating on Mars.
I'll introduce myself quickly so that you don't wonder who's this rando
There's
sitting on
someone
stage
the
with Caroline. My name is Emily. I work here at the library as well, and I am a big fan of middle grade books, and especially Skating on Mars. So Caroline's going to read a little bit from the book, and then they and I are going to have a conversation about the book. And I will be asking some questions, but that if I steal the question that you plan to ask at the end, that means you can just think of a new one. And we're just going to...
But also no pressure.
Totally.
All pressure.
So Caroline, can you start out by reading a little bit from the beginning of the book?
Sure, and I will say I have a couple sections selected, but I'm gauging everything, so I'm going to read a little from the beginning, and then if people are like, more, and I crowd surf for a while, and then I come back on stage, I might read some more, but we'll see how it feels. I'm going to stand up because in addition to being an educator and an author, I am a theater person, and I always tell the people I work with in theater that, like, you can't lean and act with energy because you just all of your energy seeps into the wall. And so I'm not going to sit either because all my energy will seep into that chair for a hot second. This is close to the beginning of the story. The protagonist is Mars. We'll learn a little bit about them in this section. But what you might need to know before I get started is that their sister is named Heather. So when they refer to Heather, that's who they're talking about. And when they refer to Katya, they're talking about their skating coach. So in this scene, they're on the ice with their skating coach, working to show them everything that they've got. And then the other thing I will say is that Mars went by a different name for the beginning of their life, and that name was Veronica. So if you hear Katya refer to Mars as Veronica, it's because Mars hasn't told Katya that they would like to be called Mars. And so both names show up in the book. After warm-up, Katya starts putting me through my paces, asking to see certain spins, jumps, and footwork in quick succession. This all goes pretty well. It should. I've been working on it long enough. I've put hours and hours into making sure that my body can follow through on the setup. So when I land a jump, it's not just about that moment. That jump is proof that all of the work I've done means something. With each landing, my chest puffs out a little more. Why shouldn't I be proud of what I can do? Heather was right in the car. I'm good at this, and I like having the chance to show off. Of course, I'd like it even more if I had the ice to myself. Instead, there are 11 other skaters with their coaches running through similar routines. They're all girls. That's the way it always is. 11 girls and me. A skater who looks like they might be a girl, but isn't. I'm nonbinary, or NB, which comes from shortening nonbinary to NB and then writing it out. ENBY. NB. That's me. Not a girl or a boy, something in the middle. It's not something that people see right away. Most don't even know to look for it, or what they would be looking for. Because, well, NB doesn't mean one thing. It's kind of the whole point. I only realized that I'm non-binary recently, pretty much right when Dad died. I stumbled on the word NB on TikTok and fell down an internet rabbit hole, but seeing that word and trying it out in my mind, it was the first time I felt like something fit. Like the world made a little more sense and I made a little more sense in it. Unfortunately, realizing I'm non-binary also changed how I see the world. Made me see how split things are. Like public bathrooms. Those plastic signs always feel a little hostile now. Stamped with those little block people with legs or a triangle, boy or girl. And look, no one gives me side eye or shoves me against the tiled wall and tells me to get out. I kind of do that to myself. I look at those two doors leading into two different bathrooms and think, there really isn't space for me. Not in the way there's space for girls and boys. And then there's skating, which is separated into men's and women's divisions. No room for someone who might be both and neither. Honestly, it feels like there's barely any room for girls. The field's crowded and competitive. More girls than boys get into figure skating in the first place. Maybe their parents sign them up for skating classes instead of soccer teams. Maybe it just has some intrinsic feminine appeal. I look around the rink and take stock of them, these girls who have stuck with skating, who wake up at 5 a.m. to drag themselves to the rink for ice time, who spring into the air knowing they will absolutely fall again and again until they get it right. Even though people think of skating as delicate, it isn't a dainty sport. It's hardcore. And the girls that stick with it, they're hardcore too. In a lot of ways, I'm like those girls. But more and more, in ways that seem to matter, I'm not. One skater with long arms and an ombre overskirt glides past me, her leg raised high and straight in an impressive spiral. My eyes trail after her, watching as she deftly and smoothly navigates across the ice. Her black hair is pulled into a tight bun on top of her head. The way she moves is the way I know Katya would like to see me move. It's as if she's gliding underwater, her limbs moving with an exact kind of grace. I've never skated that way. And I'm not jealous exactly. My skating just isn't graceful. It's powerful. And I'm sure I can do jumps that other girl can't. But I know I can't skate the way she does, not all flowy and precise. I'm still thinking about the spiral girl when I push back my leg to prep for my toe loop. As I rotate in the air, I'm thinking about the way her dainty fingers were positioned in front of her as she skated by me, and without meaning to, I look for her, and my eyes snag on her high black bun. And suddenly my blade hits the ice, and I topple awkwardly and land hard on my butt. "You're under-rotating on the toe loop, Veronica," Katya barks out across the ice. Her voice is quite deep, her accent unmistakable. She doesn't skate over to see if I'm okay. She just says, "You need more power. Bend the knee a little more." I hate falling. I can feel a blush break out across my cheeks. I hate that too. I push myself up from the ice and cut my eyes over to the spiral girl. She's looking at me too, probably because I fell. My blush deepens, hot embarrassment and anger blooming on my cheeks. I shove against the ice, and when I get up on my blades, I spring into the air for a little skip, as if to say, "I'm totally fine, nothing to see here." Then I'm off again. Thank goodness for skating. I may be angry. I may think the world is unfair, but here, when I skate, it's me and gravity. And my anger is a tool in that fight. I gather speed across the glassy surface, turn my body, bend my leg a little deeper this time, reach my foot back, and launch into the air. I keep my arms close to my chest as I spin. 1, 2, 3. I land perfectly. My hot cheeks round out as I crack a smile. My first triple. I can't stop myself from coasting around the rink and pumping my fists in the air. I used to think when people did that at the end of sports movies. It was kind of cheesy. But now I know it's totally genuine. I feel incredible, unstoppable, superhuman. Again, Katya barks out, bringing me back to earth, or ice in this case. My smile grows, turning out into an all-out grin. Again is Katya's way of saying, good job. I glance back over at Spiral Girl, but she's focused on her own practice now, in the middle of a sit spin. I wish she'd been looking at me when I pulled off a triple instead of when I pulled off a falling on my butt. I brush off my thighs and do as Katya says. Again, again, again. So that's the beginning of the book.
Let's talk about Mars as a character. Even in those, handful of pages that you read, you can tell that Mars is a strong person figuring out who they are. How did you figure out who Mars was?
So I think the thing that was really clear about Mars from the beginning was that they are really competitive. And I know a lot of competitive people in my life. But I wanted to explore what that competitiveness looked like, felt like, and how it manifested when sort of the rules of competition didn't line up with how Mars saw themselves. I think Mars, the gift I gave Mars was knowing that they're non-binary. And even though they learned or figured out that they're non-binary pretty recently in the history of the book, it isn't them figuring out like, oh, I might be non-binary. This isn't the story of them, going on TikTok and scrolling and being like, NB, what does it mean? How do I find out? And I also gave them the gift of figuring it out when they were 12. I figured out I was non-binary when I was like 30. So I think being able to explore like what a young person who is non-binary but also knows that about themselves at a young age, how that might affect the way that they interact with the world around them. I think also Mars is really connected with their family, and I should have warned people. I had that moment where I was like, when Dad died, and I was like, whoops, forgot to mention. Mars's father died of lymphoma prior to the action of the book, but a lot of the book is about them navigating their feelings about that and figuring things out about themselves and the world and not having that important person in their life anymore. But they do have Heather, their sister, and their mom, who's the best. It's a secret from me to you. Mars's mom is the best.
Along those lines, was there a particular character you most enjoyed writing for?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think like writing for Mars is fun because they're a little snarky, and they're very confident, which is always fun to write. Someone who is comfortable retorting and responding. It's also in Mars's head, so it's in first person present tense, which some people get very upset about. How dare you? How dare you make me feel these things in this moment? But so I just spent the most time with them. So I guess the answer would be Mars, but I think, hanging out with Mars's friends is fun. And I also really love Heather, Mars's sister, who we get a little bit and is, they have a relationship, a sibling relationship. I don't know if you know anything about this, but they have a sibling relationship and like they get along, but there are also times when Heather's like, stop talking. There's other stuff that needs to happen. Like, who cares about skating? Let's move on and talk about other things. So Heather was also fun. Maybe I'll write a spinoff about Heather.
I would read that book. Why skating? How did you pick that?
So I am a former figure skater who was not competitive. I competed a couple times and I was like, this is fine, but it is not how I am going to spend my time. And I got to the point in my skating life where I went to middle school, and around 11, 12 is when skating really kicks up if you're a young person in terms of the practices that you go to, the amount of time you spend, and sort of the complexity of what you're doing. So I was getting to the point where I was doing axles, which is rotating 1.5 times in the air, and talking about getting up early and driving to Detroit before school, and then going to school, and then going to practice after school. And my parents fairly were like, maybe no, maybe not that. But also, I wanted to do other things. Skating wasn't the only thing I wanted to do. In the way for Mars, it really is the thing they want to do. But I've enjoyed figure skating ever since then. I've enjoyed, I keep up with it. I watch it. I've, witnessed the changes of scoring systems over the years. But I also think that I wanted to write a book about gender, and skating is an interesting sport to look at in conjunction with the idea of gender, because the presentation element feels so important in figure skating. And, there are non-binary figure skaters. Timothy LeDuc competed recently as a pair skater, non-binary. But it's also, a slowly shifting world.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the writing process is like for perhaps people who are watching who are considering that they might want to write a book one day?
So for me, I think the first part is having some ideas, or not even ideas, but just like topics that I want to think about. So as you can probably figure out from what we've said so far, the 3 sort of topics that were driving me throughout this process were figure skating, gender, and grief. And with those 3 topics, there are a lot of conversations that can happen between them. And one of those conversations is a book called Skating on Mars, available now. But in looking at sort of those conversations, then this idea for this story grew. And I also will say, I thought about what I enjoy in books and what I enjoyed as a young person. And I know I said that I figured out that I was non-binary in my 30s, but there were some clues along the way. Like when I was younger, I really loved any story where a girl was like, I'm going to dress up like a boy to do something that I want to do. I was like, that sounds awesome. But that trope shows up in this story. I thought about, I think about the things that I want, the things that I'm interested in, the stories I want to tell. And then I come up with okay, let's imagine what the trailer for my book would be. In a world, that kind of thing. And so-and-so has always been hot stuff on the ice. But when things get cold with their friend, whatever. But I think thinking of it that way actually just helps me feel a little fun about it, but also think about a trailer is meant to sell you on seeing a movie. And I want to sell myself on writing this book, but I also want to sell the idea of would someone else want to read this book? So I think about that trailer kind of thing. We call it a pitch in words, but I'm a visual person, so I imagine the trailer. And then I just start noodling around. I think for me, I have a background in theater, as I mentioned before, and so figuring out who my characters are is really important to me. So being able to figure out what does this person want? What is driving them? Why are they behaving the way they behave? How do they behave? Helps me to find a way in. And then when I wrote this book, I was a certified seat of my pants writer. Some people call them discovery writers, which is nicer. George R.R. Martin calls it a gardening writer. Tending the garden. But I just wrote by the seat of my pants and was like, we'll see where this story goes. And then, of course, I went back and revised. and revised and revised, and then you sell your book, and then you get to revise it more. So that's a big part of writing too.
Along those lines, once you sold your book, was there any major changes that you needed to make?
There weren't any huge changes. The thing about your debut novel, which is your first novel that you publish, is that you have to have a whole thing to present to a publisher, and then they decide if they want to publish it or not. Doesn't mean that you won't change things, but it just means they're looking at the whole package. And to get that whole package, you actually work really hard before you even get to the point where you know it's going to be sold. So in this case, I had worked really hard. I had revised with my agent. Originally, the book expanded over a couple months, and Heather is cast in a show in this, and we actually saw Mars like go to the performance of the show, and they had an interaction with their grandparents around being non-binary and watching Heather and being proud of her. And my agent was like, but what if it weren't multiple months, but 2 weeks? And I was like, okay, well, I guess you can't do a whole show in 2 weeks, so that's out. Heather will get into the show. But I think those kinds of changes happened a little bit. Some things were developed more. There are some secondary characters who got a little more airtime in my revisions. But the reality is that it's pretty polished if you've gotten an agent and a publisher interested. Now, I finished my second book, and that one I sold on proposal, which means that I wrote 50 pages and I gave a outline, a synopsis of where the story's going. And then they're like, okay, great, write it. And I wrote it, and then they were like, okay, but we gotta change some things here. Because I wasn't giving them the polished version. I was giving them a version that I wrote, and then I revised a little bit, and maybe I had 1 or 2 other people read. But like Skating on Mars, I had like 10 people read, and I had revised it many, many, many times. So,
Is there anything that isn't in your book but about your characters that you might share with us? I know as a writer, you know so much more, and there were things that got cut out. Or is it you want it to be the pure artifact
That's a great question. I've been thinking about this actually because obviously Mars is queer. They're non-binary, and also attraction is just starting to enter their world, as it does sometimes when you turn 12, 13, 14, 25, whatever. I don't want to I told someone the other day, I was like, well, in my headcanon, that these things are true about these characters. And the person was like, I think if you're the author, that's canon. That's just what it is. I was like, fair, but I didn't put it on the page. Like, Mars's mom is bisexual, but it isn't like she's like, let's talk. You came out to me, I'm going to come out to you. Like, she let Mars have that moment. And work through that. And so I'm not going to say anything. I guess is the
totally
short
fair.
answer. I snuck in there that mom was bisexual, but just assume everyone's queer is basically the moral of the story.
Something you haven't talked about that much yet, but I saw as being a real piece of the book, is also friendship, and how friendships sometimes change in middle school as you are becoming more of who you are.
Yeah, so in the book, Mars has a best friend named Libby, who is 1 year older than they are. They go to the same school, and Libby and Mars are best friends in the way that best friends are often best friends. They hang out all the time. They have sleepovers. When they're at school together, they try to find each other in the halls. They eat lunch together. But Libby is also like a very vivacious, chatty person who loves hanging out with everyone around them and has 8th grade friends. And Mars sort of struggles with like, what if you dump me? What if I'm no longer your friend? What then? And I think a little bit of the book is Libby reassuring Mars about that. But then also, what if that does happen? What if Libby does have these other friends and other things emerge? For me, and I have this happen in a lot of my books, so it must be something that I think about a lot. I've worked in a 6 through 12 school for many years, so I've seen it happen sometimes, but also I'm a human. who interacts with other humans and has friends. And, friends mess up, friendships change, friendships end. Friendships end and then rekindle in weird ways, wonderful ways sometimes. But I think in this book, Libby, spoiler alert, messes up. And I wanted to give space to the idea of messing up in friendships, particularly in middle school, because it happens so frequently. Because you're just figuring out, it's like the first time that you have a relationship that, like, my child is 7 and her relationships are the people that I'm willing to drive to. I like that mom, so you will be friends with that child. But, I think you're sort of figuring out who you are, figuring out who you want to be, and that sort of dictates who you hang out with too. There's a reason that cliques are eternal and show up again and again, particularly with that age group of people. So, and I will say, like, preview, my second book, like, the opening premise is a friendship breakup. Like, these two friends are not friends anymore. They do not get along anymore. And they both know it, but also, like, they haven't been able to really process it or understand it and figure out, like, what does it mean that I don't talk to my person?
You write very accurately to the middle school perspective.
I'm still a middle schooler.
It pulled me right back to those years. How do you tap into that? Or is it that you still are a middle schooler through and through?
Still a middle schooler. It's why I'm able to go into middle school every day at my school. Feel so comfortable. I think, I'm very lucky in that I get to interact with a lot of young people in my life. I work in a school. I work in theaters. I have a child. And of course, I am not, like, secretly listening in and being like, I'm going to use this. It's all material for the next one. But I do think, the world has changed since I was a middle schooler. I was talking to someone I just reconnected with, actually, from my middle school years, and they were talking about how we got a letter about one of the gym teachers being queer, like, in the mail, to be like, hey, just so you know, your kids are going to be taught by someone who's queer, which is, like, a weird thing to think. I had totally forgotten about it, and they were like, yeah, that happened. And of course now, like, no. No, I assume so, honestly. But, like, I also think just the world is a different place. But, young people are capable of amazing things and have tremendous capacity. So I try to tap into that. But also, like, some things are just the way they happen again and again and again, like clicks. Sorry.
So you, as you've said, put a whole lot of time into this book up front. And then you wait for your publicity date. And in case y'all aren't aware, Skating on Mars has gotten some wonderful reviews, some very exciting accolades. What does that feel like?
It's very odd, I'll be honest, because I finished up with Mars about 6 months ago. Like, I haven't touched it since then because it has to be printed and, like, cut all the edges off and make sure everything looks good. And even before that, I was done with, like, I guess in February of 2022 was when I had turned in my final manuscript, and then it's transmitted to copy edits and proofreaders and all these other things. And a few things, some tweaks happened after that, but nothing huge. So it's over a year since I've really significantly, like, had my hands on this book. So it's wonderful to have other people discovering Mars, but I'm also like, they're 3 years old, my friends. They've been around. I also think, like, the life cycle of a book is very interesting because we have these experiences. I mean, like, there are books that I'll discover that are many years old that I didn't know existed, and, like, I stumble across them and I read them. I'm like, oh my gosh, this really is tapping into something. and that when that happens, like that book is sort of rebirthed in a new way for that new person. So I'm excited for like to be at this point in the life cycle of my book, but it is very strange too.
Have you gotten reader feedback from people you don't already know? Or is it still too early for that?
I've gotten like a handful, nothing too significant, I would say. A few things. Thank you if you've done it. Pro tip for anyone out there, web people, real humans. Authors love it when you write to them. Like we are like hungry to hear something, especially if it's something that, I mean, don't write and be like, I liked it, but maybe if this hadn't happened, it would have been better or whatever. But like, I would love to hear from people, and I know all the writers I talk to are like, yeah, that's the best. Mm-hmm. The best is hearing from you all. So if you take nothing else, feel empowered to reach out to your favorite authors and let them know that you appreciate their work, even if the book is older, because it's a good reminder that people are always discovering your words.
I love that. Can you talk a little bit about your next book? Get us excited for next May.
Next May, May 7th, 2024 is when Linus and Etta Could Use a Win hits shelves. I would say like the pitch for Linus and Etta is like My Fair Lady, but gender bent and in a middle school with a student council race. Obviously. So it starts with a friendship breakup. That's Etta and her best friend Marigold, no longer friends. And Etta is very much the odd person out in middle school. They're in 8th grade. They're all in 8th grade. She's in 8th grade, and she is a real hot topic frequent shopper. So if you don't know those vibes, like goth emo energy. And very sarcastic, super fun to write. If you loves horror movies, just like a real blast to hang out with. But she's very sarcastic, very over it, ready to go to high school, ready to go to a high school that isn't an alternative high school, just wants to be away. And makes a comment under her breath one day that when the student council assembly is happening that, all middle schoolers are sheep. And pretty much anyone could get elected student council president if they really tried. And then Marigold overhears this and says, like, I bet you couldn't get someone elected. And of course, friendship breakups being what they are, it's hard to back away from that challenge. And the subject of the bet is Linus, who is the new boy at school, which proves to be difficult because Linus has no interest in standing in front of his peers and talking and telling them how he's going to make the school that he just arrived at better. And also, Linus also recently came out as trans at his previous school, but is at this new school, and he's just a boy here. I'm just a boy at this school, and it's sort of nice to have that. But he's also negotiating, like, that transition is still happening at home. It's still happening with his family. So there's a little bit of, like, tiredness from Linus. And Etta is like, well, I got to win this bet. I'm pretty tenacious. Let's get going. And it turns into a real friendship between the two of them. But, of course, it's rooted in this bet. And maybe that's a problem.
Oh, I can't wait to... I will wait.
I'll also say it's dual perspective, so you get to hang out with Linus, who loves puns.
Oh,
sorry in advance.
Fits right in then here.
And then would love to write summer game codes, to be honest. And then, of course, you spend time with Etta, who is just sarcastic beyond all reason.
Oh. Well, to tide us over until May, do you think you might read a little bit more from Skating on Mars, and then we can open up to a Q&A?
Sure, I'll read just a brief passage. So this is Mars is skating and getting ready for competition, and Katya is out But her husband comes in to coach Mars for this session, and his name is Dimitri. And so she's worked with Dimitri a couple times, and she's a little like, or not she, I'm sorry, I'm misgendering my own character. Whoops. Sorry, Mars. But they're kind of feeling out like this new coach and what they're doing. I'm trying to figure out where I want to start. So they're running through a lot of things, and he keeps saying, "It's okay, again, please," and makes her do the moves again. At least this guy is polite, so I do it again. I nail it again. "It's okay, again, please." We go on like that for almost the full hour. Nail it again, nail it again. And even though I don't want to, even though I know I am lucky that I get to work with Dimitri at all, I feel myself getting the tiniest bit annoyed. My mom is paying for this man's time. Why pay for an hour when he could just record himself saying, "It's okay, again, please," and just play that on repeat? My hour is almost up when I let out an obnoxious noise that is somewhere between a grunt and a moan. "It's not okay?" Dimitri asks. He's so even. It's like he's made of ice. "Again?" I say sarcastically. "No. There's still time left," I point out. "What will doing it again do?" I sigh. "I don't know. What did doing it 27 times over and over do?" "You tell me." Dimitri's voice is flat. It's always flat. He never gives any clues about the answer he's looking for. "I showed you I could do it." "That only takes once." I sigh again. I roll my eyes this time. "I showed you I could do it 27 times. You only need to do it once for competition." What is he getting at? No one lands their first and only jump in competition. You work and you work and work until you can't work anymore to be able to perform. You drive away the doubt and the anger until it's just you and the ice and gravity. Yeah, I only get one chance in competition. I want to make sure no matter what, I can nail it. "Ah, well, seems like you can." I furrow my brows. What is he getting at? Too far. "It's okay, I have another copy." "Okay, so now what?" I ask, because I genuinely don't know the answer. "That's up to you. Do you know how you want to skate?" Not quite sure what he means by how I want to skate. I mean, I want to skate clean, perfect. But that's obvious, isn't it? That's what everyone wants. Like my music? I'm working with my sister on that. Your sister? You think she can answer this for you? Dimitri leans forward and puts his hand on my shoulder. I don't shrug him off, but I feel myself standing taller, pushing his hand up towards the rafters with my shoulder. "Ah, there you are. It's nice to see you." I'm about to ask what he means, but just then the hockey buzzer goes off. Ice time is over.
So Jacob is going to get a mic and go around to anyone who has questions. But while he gets that ready, your passage reminded me of one more thing I wanted to ask about, which is music. Can you talk a little bit about Mars's music choice?
Oh, yeah. Well, so there is a little David Bowie inspiration throughout this book, and that is, I love David Bowie, but also David Bowie plays around with gender quite a bit in his lifetime. So it worked out well. But I think, Mars figuring out what they want to skate to and how they want to skate plays into music. And originally, of course, I had put a lot of lyrics in here because the lyrics are connected. It turns out that is a no-no in publishing. Do not put lyrics in because we are not paying for that.
But we could look up the lyrics.
Oh, yeah. I also have a
readers.
playlist on my Twitter, at Caroline Huntoon on Twitter, and I made a Spotify playlist with the songs from the book and then also songs that I'm like, this feels right.
Questions? Yes.
Great job. Great job asking a question right away.
Why did you choose to? Why did you choose to like dedicate the book to your mom, like at the beginning?
Okay, so I dedicated the book to my mom, and it says "Still Love You." So my mom died when I was 14, in between 8th and 9th grade. So a lot of the grief that I look at throughout this book is coming from a real place. And I thought of her a lot while I was writing this book. So it felt fitting to dedicate the book to her. And also I wanted to make my dad cry.
I guess this is kind of a publishing process question, but I love the cover, and I'm wondering like how
Me too.
I love it, like how the design for the cover and title came to be.
So the book has always been Skating on Mars, which is kind of rare, honestly, because as an author, you're told pretty clearly up front, like, we might change. We might change the title of your book. Don't get too attached. But Skating on Mars has always been Skating on Mars. It plays on David Bowie's song Life on Mars. So it's playing around with that a little bit, but it also hits on like, there's a person named Mars in it, and they're skating. So I was joking earlier that I'm going to get a bunch of reviews that are like, they did not skate on the planet Mars. Misnomer. But when it comes to cover art, first of all, I have to say I'm tremendously lucky. I adore my cover, and I'm so happy that I got to work with Violet Tobacco, who did the art, and then Elle Witt, who was the designer for the book. So your publisher, in my case, my publisher, I don't want to speak for everyone's experience, but my publisher came to me and said, hey, this is the artist we're thinking about. And they sent me to Violet's website and said, here's some other, books that they've worked on. And here, she did Phil Stamper's Small Town Pride. She's done actually a lot of book covers recently, too, in middle grade spaces. And I looked at her stuff and I thought it was great. There was a lot of fun texture in it. There seemed to be interesting playing with light. And I was like, all right, sounds cool. Like, cool artist, whatever. And then they are like, okay, so what are some things that you're thinking about with the cover? Send over some covers you like. What are some covers that you're like, no? Like for me, I really can't handle covers that have cursive on them. Like when it's written, sort of like in a live, laugh, love energy. I'm like, no, thank you. Not for me. I also really was like, you need to see this title across the room. And then I talked a little bit about Mars. I said I would love it if there was like the Bowie lightning bolt from the Aladdin Sane album cover integrated in, but like I don't know how, like maybe it's Mars's face and that's happening, but you don't have to copy the album cover. So I was very general, which I think is sometimes a blessing, because if you go in with too much of a feeling about what you need this to look like, you're always going to be disappointed. And I will also say that I have learned to trust my publisher, and in particular my design team, because they turned out something amazing. So who am I to be like, actually, I think that Mars should have, this other thing. I will say then you get a sketch, and the sketch for mine, actually, Mars was standing still like they were about to skate, and the lightning bolt was over their face. And the way that it interacted with the typeface was a little tricky, and I was like, I would really love to see Mars being a little more active. But like, it's also, I don't know, you know better than me. You're the professional artist. I'm the professional author. And then they sent a color sketch, and they're like, these are the colors we're thinking. But by that point, they're sort of off to the races tweaking, and lots of people are giving lots of good input. So I think the other thing about publishing is so much is happening that you don't know about. As a reader, certainly, but even as an author, there's a lot happening behind the scenes at Fywell and Friends, which is my publisher, that I just don't, like they're having conversations all the time. I'm not in those meetings, and I don't need to be, but like the reminder that things are always happening is really important. and then I will say, like, I'm in the middle of this process for my second book. I just got the color sketch, and I'm really excited to be able to see where that goes. Look at all these good job. You're a good audience, small but mighty.
You mentioned. You mentioned that Mars was obviously queer in this discussion, and is that something that we realize in the book, or does queer and non-binary always go together?
So I think of queer as an umbrella term. So, and that can be related to gender, sexuality, gender presentation, any number of things. So I think of it's obvious that Mars is non-binary because I'm pretty explicit about it when I'm talking about the book, but also so to me, then that makes them obviously queer. Come in if you want to. Hi. But I also think they also have a crush on a girl. So that's what I mean by, I will also say, from here on out, when you read a book by me, let's just assume. Let's just assume. Yeah.
Oh,
How did you feel when you were writing the book?
So when I write, I'm kind of in a little fever dream. And if you've ever read The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, there is this device, the Golden Compass. It's also called an alethiometer, but and the way that machine this is going somewhere, I swear. But the way that device works is Lyra, the main character, uses these 3 different arrows. It looks kind of like a clock, and points at these different symbols. And then there is another longer hand to the clock that sweeps around to different symbols in a different order and tells her the answer to a question she's asking. But to ask the question, she has to hold it in her mind and think about those symbols. So when I'm writing a book, I'm holding all these different ideas in my mind in different places, and then I'm writing, and I'm sort of like that 4th hand that's moving around and figuring out what does this mean? How does this connect it to this? Da, 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 da. So it's really invigorating and exciting, but it's also a little bit I also have characters who bully me sometimes and are like, no, we're doing this now. I'm not doing that. I know it's in the outline. I don't care. And I try to let that energy take me where it wants to go. And then every once in a while, I'm like, nope, we're pulling the reins back. Sorry, you have to mess up here. I know you don't want to. It's for your own good. So, and I also write, I will say some writers write every day. 15 minutes, 30 minutes. I'm going to write 2 pages every day. Kate DiCamillo is a good example of someone who has historically said, I write 2 pages a day. I cannot write 2 pages a day. I try to find a chunk of time, then I get into my Golden Compass mode, and then I throw a lot of spaghetti on the wall. So it's exciting, but it's also, and sometimes it's frustrating because you'll be writing and you're like, this isn't working. This doesn't mean anything. What was I doing? Just keep going.
I think we've got time for one more, if there was one more.
Great job. Great, good timing on the questions, everyone.
So you talked hello. You talked about some of the things that you ended up cutting out of the book, in particular related to Heather. Do you think that there is a time that when you're writing future books, you would revisit the worlds of the books that you've already written? So maybe in the sense of a sequel, or maybe even not a sequel, but just sort of have the characters reappearing?
I wouldn't be opposed to that idea. And certainly I have my idea graveyard where I resurrect things every so often. So I talked about how one of the parts that got cut was Mars interacting with their grandparents around their identity. And that actually became a big part of Linus's character, and Linus and Etta could use a win because the tension, his parents are super supportive and pretty good about using his pronouns and, doing what, advocating for him. But his grandma really struggles, and they don't always correct her, talk about it with her because it's painful and awkward, and you don't want to always be fighting with your parents, probably. So some of that got baked into this other story. In my brain, like, sure, I have spin-offs for everyone. But I also appreciate the opportunity to tell different stories in different spaces and in different worlds.
So as a reminder, Book Suite is here selling books, and how perfect! Caroline is here too, so you could have them sign your book.
Yeah, I'll
So
sit
now
at
is
this
a perfect
table.
opportunity. But before we do that, let's give Caroline a big round of applause. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Ann Arbor District Library. And as a reminder to those of you who stuck around or maybe tuned in late, that summer game code is Great Skates. GREATSKATES.
Beautiful plug. Thanks, Caroline, and thank you all for coming.